what are the protests for?
Well, I'm not sure that everybody's clear about why they're protesting, but the articulated arguments against that artistic work or caricature,
Freedom, whatever.
were basically of two types. One argument said, we don't even allow the depiction of the Prophet Muhammad. This is going back to history. Islam, of course, Islam is seen by Muslims as the religion of all prophets, but the context in which the Prophet Muhammad began preaching his message is 7th century Arabia, a litholatris society, a society that worships stones, that worships idols, idolaters. And the image of anything that could be worshipped is a big question mark. I'm not saying that all Muslims agreed all the time that there was no problem, that there was always a problem in depicting images, but it is a question that people talk.
Any images, live images?
Any worshipable, basically any image that could be worshipped. Now, of course, jurists get into the discussion and say, well, there is no, I mean, it's sort of impossible to imagine somebody worshiping an image that doesn't represent any, that doesn't have any soul. I mean, even if you put a stone that doesn't look like an individual, there must be an understanding that represents
symbolism there.
Yeah, and there is a historical understanding also that most polytheistic societies looked at the idols as representing some animistic or somehow related to the soul that generates an energy that
which challenge to the to God, Allah. That's what it is, denying the
even before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, that's how the Arabian society functioned. They believed that there were different powers that may dwell in these idols, and one of the big controversies, and you can see that in the Quran, between the monotheism that the Prophet brings to the discussion and the polytheism that existed before is, you can read in the Quran, for example, the defense of polytheism by the pagans. They say, well, it sort of doesn't make sense to talk about this one God. If all the gods are becoming one, that's one argument they make. And, in response, the Quran makes the argument that if there were more than one God, there would be conflict. And, that leads to a big discussion as to whether the universe as it exists today is a manifestation of basically some kind of conflict. Of course, in Greek society, where there were gods, different gods, these represented different forces, and people then begin to talk about how these different forces are to be found in our life, maybe in thunder or whatever.
Sure.
And in Zoroastrianism, the same thing. There is an understanding that there are maybe just two forces, the force of good and the force of evil. So one of the arguments that are made against these cartoons is that, number one, they basically get very close to touching a certain sensitivity, which is the Prophet Muhammad is not an image to be circulated or portrayed. Yeah.
But are the non-Muslim also obliged to follow that beliefs? Like Muslims do not eat pork, but Christians do.
Exactly, and that's one of the amazing things about this discussion. I mean, I was beginning to say, to explain how I don't think that either party is able to even spell out their positions easily. So, I mean, you could definitely say there is no conversation. We established in the beginning there is no dialogue. You could have this conversation and say, this is a question of freedom of expression on the one hand and the sacred on the other. And of course, that's one audience may understand that. Some people might think that the sacred is a useless category or unintelligible, and they don't want to talk about the sacred. The sacred is nothing but an apparatus of oppression, reminiscent of pre-modern, unenlightened cultures, etc. But that would be a dialogue, which doesn't exist. Now, one other argument, though, that of course the more apparent argument is that even if we set aside the depiction of the Prophet,
Yeah.
which of course here the question of polytheism isn't really that relevant, but people still brought it up because these images were not made to be worshipped. The main argument is, well, what is the claim in these cartoons? The Malaysian Prime Minister today said that, basically said that one reading of all that is that Muslims are congenital terrorists. If you're going to bring the founder of the religion and depict him as a terrorist, that means
And I
from
thought
the origin.
that's what the resentment of some of the Muslims in the streets. They've been humiliating in so many different ways. They've been singled out and after 9/11, war on terrorism, and they feel they are under assault from even their own corrupt government, the West, and this is another blow.
Exactly.
Symbol.
Yeah, certainly.
Most of these people are not really the one who goes to church, and they are, they're probably after this demonstration, they go and stand in line to get a visa to Canada.
I mean, yeah, the Muslim protesters. So, I mean, it's really hard to, to describe the gathering of crowds because the crowds are often very diverse and very different. And, I was in one of my classes in McAllister. We talk about pre-modern encounters between Muslim societies, mostly of the Mediterranean, and European societies. And we talk about the Crusade. And one of the things about the Crusade is that the rhetoric that was used by the Pope at that time, in the 11th century, to mobilize Christians really catered for different audiences. So, I mean, let the thieves be now soldiers of Christ. The people, it's like what Saddam Hussein did when he just sent the thieves out of his jails. If they could be forces against my society, or I could unleash them and they become forces against my enemies, and that's how they work. So among these crowds, you will have the thieves who decided to become soldiers of and you'll find also the politically lucid who has calculated that makes sense and sends a message and so on. So it's a tough business actually, analyzing crowds.
When you watch all this in the media and how the media and their question they've been asked. I mean, it's very implicit and very accusatory in a sense. You bring somebody, a man, and you ask him, do you support the people in the street? Do you support the killing innocents? I mean, everybody's been accused now or put in the framework of BelAhdan, even if it was somebody has a different. So, I mean, why is it hard? I mean, we have, let's say, homosexuality is illegal in most of Muslim world, religious, whatever the case. I'm not saying it. And let's say, when the Egyptian, whatever, they try to exercise that legal rights of some of the activity of homosexuality, we see the West protesting. This is the law. Homosexuality is, sodomy is illegal in 16 states in this country. And you could be put in jail. So, what is this, there is a universal law. I mean, as we are asking the Muslims to understand, non-Muslims do not have to adhere to these beliefs. Yes, you cannot depict images of the Prophet, but those non-Muslims, they don't have to follow that.
Well, that is certainly accepted by most Muslim jurists across Muslim history. The question as to whether Islamic law or Islamic values apply to either the non-Muslim communities living in majority Muslim countries or even Muslims living outside of Muslim countries is a big question, like us here. So, there are different views as usual in jurisprudence, but it's understandable that it's not as if Islam begins with this assumption that there is a world government, and sooner or later that's what will happen. So now back to the first point as to how the question is raised. Of course, part of how the question is raised reflects the lack of responsibility or lack of interest in getting something out of it, other than just